Welcome to Running in the 70s, where we interview, meet, and get to know athletes of all kind who were running in the 70s. I'm your host, Matthew Kleinowski. Today on the podcast, we're stretching the idea of running in the 70s a little bit to talk to someone who was running all through the 1960s and back in the time when they had dual meets between countries, when people ran behind the Iron Curtain. Very exciting talk today to George Germann. Welcome, George.
Thank you.
Let's tell everybody your origin story as a competitive athlete. When did you start competing and when did you decide to become a runner?
Very interesting. I have an identical twin brother, and he went out for high school track in his junior year, the outdoor spring season. And he started to do quite well, winning medals. Not to be outdone, I went out in my spring season junior year, and I found running to be quite difficult and hard. So I quit. My brother kept winning more medals. The track coach was my driver's ed teacher, and he embarrassed me. I went back out with 3 weeks left in the season, got third place in the Morris County, New Jersey mile. And the track coach said, if you guys did so well with no training, with hardly any sports time, if you come out, run cross country out there, I think I can get you a scholarship for college. And that sort of nailed it. So we both went out for cross country and track the following year, and the rest is history.
What was it like? What was the facilities, the shoes, the uniforms, the coaching? What was it like?
Let me start with the coaching. At that time, this is 1960, 61. Most coaches who went out for cross country or track really didn't know much about the sports. Now I'm generalizing here, so take it based on my experience.
Sure.
So they really didn't know the topic. My cross country coach was a history teacher. He knew very little about it, but it made extra money for him. The similar thing was true of the track coaches. They were predominantly football coaches. So they didn't really know the training, go out there and run a couple laps. And we had good spirit. We wanted to win. So I think that made up for the lack of coaching. Being very young, I didn't know anything about training or coaching. I did whatever the coach told me, and it worked out and paid off well. So it was different. The equipment was completely different than what we're experiencing today. They were probably the cheapest spikes you could get if you were on the track, and you put them on. You didn't complain. You did the workout, and you went to the meets. So for me, going out end of my junior year in high school, I just did what I was told. My senior year, I did extraordinarily well, was undefeated in the half mile. We had an undefeated cross-country team. So all of a sudden, we became big men on campus.
Yeah.
Track and field and cross-country was a minor sport. But we were right up there with the football team, who, by the way, was undefeated at Butler High School in New Jersey.
Wow. Let me ask you about just one more little thing. What did you run at practice?
Let's stretch here a little bit. Normally, we did interval training. It may be 5 quarter miles in and out, run one, jog one, run another one. My recollection is mostly during track, it was interval workout. We didn't do any cross training. We didn't go out for long runs during track. It was pretty much on the track, competitive type workouts.
Let me ask you about the environment. You just ran in your own tennis shoes. And what was the press like? Were you noticed because of this success in the local media?
Gradually, yes. I think the equipment department gave us a pair of shoes to run in, spikes. We didn't purchase our own. I remember getting them. Cross country were basically our own sneakers, or maybe they gave us. I'm having difficulty remembering high school.
Sure.
But there was no big deal about whatever equipment you had, you wore, and you were happy to have it.
Sure.
Later on in the mid 60s, when Nike and Adidas came along, it was different. Now you started to think about your equipment. But in high school, I didn't give much thought to my equipment. I did what I was told. It was working out well, and it worked.
When did you think of running beyond high school? Apart from your coach saying, I can get you a scholarship, when did it personally occur to you that this was going to be something you would do after high school?
I would say not until my senior year, when the track coach said, I think I get you a scholarship. We didn't dismiss it, myself and my brother. We said, wow, this is a path for an education, because at the time, my parents were not able to afford to send us to college. So even though I wanted to get to college and I took the college preparatory course, it was not in my immediate dream until the opportunity from track and field became available. In my senior year, we both recognized, wow, we're getting pretty good at this sport. We're doing well. We're undefeated. The media is taking notice. And the fact that we were identical twins, that sort of helped. So I would say it was very late in my senior year and everything worked out well.
What contact was made? Did your coach figure out who he would contact on your behalf, or did universities find you?
I went to Seton Hall University on a track and field scholarship. And I would say that John Gibson, who was a coach, found us. He was a starter at the Morris County Championships and a number of meets in Morris County. Butler High School, by the way, was located in Morris County, New Jersey. So he noticed us. He knew from speaking with our coach that we didn't have much experience. We were young and hungry. And he noticed the other coaches in the area at college hadn't noticed us yet. In a sense, John Gibson got an exclusive.
Yeah, you're just fishing in a small pond there and with the big pole. What was it like then, your transition to college, coaching, environment, academics? What was that like for you at the beginning of your freshman year? How'd you do?
I guess a bit of bewilderment. Should I be here? I chose a very difficult major. I was a mathematics major, and I was coming in on a full scholarship, probably very inexperienced. A number of the New York schools, particularly the Catholic schools in New York, were more seasoned runners, and they came in with a superiority attitude. I was from this hick high school out in Western New Jersey, so they didn't give me much credibility. But I said, hey, I'm as good as anyone else. Now, I probably had the lack of experience to realize or not realize I should have been in awe of these folks, but I didn't. Going out was a unique experience. Wow, I'm in the big time here. I'm going to get my college degree. And all I kept saying to myself, I have to prove myself. They're paying me to give me a scholarship to compete and to do well. And my coach made it very clear. The first reason you're here is academics. Secondly, you got a scholarship, you've got to compete, you got to train. And after that, you can find time for social life. That's third. So it was awe-inspiring. And I did well, probably did better than anybody else who had come in. We had 10 people coming on scholarship. And I just tried to do the best I could.
Great. Let me ask you about another aspect of this. Sometimes I've had some of the people I've interviewed comment that some of them were not at all interested in school. Some of them noticed that a lot of people who got into running as a sport were intellectual or academic oriented. I was a math major originally when I started decades later, but how many people were at Seton Hall in the math department when you started, and were there any women at all?
Seton Hall University at the time was all male, so no. You're very perceptive because each of those characteristics I noticed. There were the brain types. Track and field had on average a GPA of about 3.5 in that range. So we're ahead of the average GPA with regard to the student body. There were people who were too cerebral. There are those who thought they were rewarding their high school coach. So they got the scholarship, they achieved what they had to achieve, they rewarded their coach, and they didn't think they had to perform. Coming in with very little experience, I realized immediately they're betting on my coming, or my running, if you will. So they bet on the come, and I wasn't going to let them down. I realized that scholarship is got to give something in return. I was a math major, and there was 150 math majors when I entered Seton Hall University in 1961. This is right after Sputnik, and all of a sudden math was a big thing. When I
Right.
graduated, I was one of 10. So
Were some of those dropouts or were they major changers, do you think?
some were dropouts, some were major changes. At the time, math was a tough topic, and we had a very good program, and I just persevered. I needed at that time to maintain a 2.0 average to be eligible for under
Right.
NCAA competition. So I wanted to make sure first that I was eligible and I could compete. So I would say at that time, competing was my number one goal in life. Obviously, academically, and I graduated on time, but you need to focus, regimented, and disciplined as you're a runner.
You got free expenses at the college. What other things were part of your scholarship? Was it room and board? Was it equipment? Did you get to get your classes first? What was involved then?
Okay, so yes, I had full scholarship, so that included tuition, room, board, books. We didn't get any expenses, so we were still amateur in that sense, and we were expected to maintain an academic average to be eligible, and we expected to go to class. There weren't a lot of frills and freebies. That's all changed. Colleges today, it's that they pamper the athletes like there's no tomorrow. Now, if you're in a major sport like football or basketball, then of course they get a little better treatment with that respect. But our coach did not believe, for example, under NCAA rules, you could get $25 a week. He said no. so,
Wow.
so we had to find little part-time jobs to make up our own expenses.
When did your success take you to the top of the team there? You said you were very successful. And what about your event selection? Staying in the half mile, but you had run the mile, and of course you had run 2 miles across country. What about the distance changing in your event specialization?
In high school, cross country, we're undefeated, and I did really well. My brother and I were finishing 1 and 2 in high school. He was a better longer distance runner, and I was content to be second to him, even though we're very competitive. But on the track, it was a different story. I predominantly ran the half mile in high school. My brother ran the mile, and that was good. Coach kept us apart. That way we could win 2 events. In college, even though we're identical twins, I entered Seton Hall University in 1961. My brother entered a year later. With identical twins, he was unable to meet the academic standards, and I had no problem. Don't ask me why. There's a big difference, even though we're identical. So that was probably a blessing in disguise. So I had the sun over me. He was in my shadow for the next 2 years. He did get in the following year. In 1961, I entered as a freshman. We started out as cross country. We all bonded very well. Once we got past the initial issues that we spoke about earlier, we realized we had a good team, and everybody competed hard, strong, and we won the Metropolitan Championships. We competed, can't remember, we were up in the top 3 of the IC4A championships. In the Metropolitan Championships outdoors, the freshmen performed better than the varsity. So I ran a 4:16 mile, 151 or 3 half mile. And all of a sudden, I'm the best person on the team, including the varsity. And it was a shock to me because my best high school time in the half mile was 1:57. So all of a sudden, I'm running in the low 150s.
Yeah.
It just happened.
Let's talk about that freshman year and then the subsequent years in terms of travel. How far afield did your biggest meets go, and how did you get there as a team?
We did travel quite a bit. Cross country was pretty much by bus, but the indoor track season, we competed in a number of the East Coast relays. Every major city on the East Coast, going down to south is Baltimore, and as far north as Toronto, had track meets. So we were invited to compete in the 2-mile relay. And so we traveled every weekend. We were on the road going somewhere, either by train, by plane, or car. So that was a given. There was no social life because your weekend was you're going to be competing in the Boston AA, you got New York AC, the Melrose Games, the Toronto Maple Leaf, the Philadelphia. So for me, a young person, this was exciting.
Yeah.
I flew on more planes in 1 year than I did my entire life. I only been on one plane once, but so that was exciting, and we were doing well. We were winning medals, and it was exciting.
Were you seeing competitors at the same meets from other universities? Were there people in your time there in the half mile or the 2 mile relay that you saw over and over again? And there any names that people might recognize from that era?
Yes, I think you may remember the name Tommy Sullivan. He ran for
Yeah,
Villanova.
yeah.
He ran a 4:03.5 mile as a high schooler.
Wow.
I was a high school miler, and I think my best mile at the time was like 4:31 or something like that. And he runs a 4:03.5. I was blown away. And I was in awe of this fellow, Tommy Sullivan. And when I came to Seton Hall University, we competed against Villanova. So I met Tommy Sullivan, and we really became the best of friends. Even though I was in awe of him and just admired his performance, I wasn't afraid of him. And we competed hard. And most of the time, we competed never one on one in the relays. I ran the anchor, he ran the third. So I never really ran against him race to race. But we became friends. Sometime Villanova won. Noel Carroll is another name. Great Irish runner. Tommy Farrell, two-time Olympian in the 800 meter. We became best of friends. We were roommates overseas. We would meet these fellows almost every weekend, and it was exciting. All of a sudden, I was reading track and field news about these folks, or I'd read them in the paper in high school. And now I'm hobnobbing with the people I always admired. It was a unique experience.
Very cool. I wanted to ask you about the relay. Let's talk a little bit of track technical. The 2 mile relay is certainly a big high school event across the whole country now. A track staple at every meet in Pennsylvania. And I ran the high school 2 mile relay also. You were the anchor man. Did you practice handoffs? How technical was it, or was it just pass the baton and run?
No, it was technical. First of all, the relays were a big event during the 60s. College relays, every week there was a meet, which included the mile relay, the 2 mile relay, the distance medley, the sprint, on and on. And then outdoors, you had a number of meets, the Penn Relay being the most prominent, the IC4A championships, the Marine Corps. Every weekend there would be a college relay meet, and relays were big, important. Training wise, if we're doing a 2 mile relay, you got to be a near idiot if you can't pass the baton. But we did practice, and our coach certainly had technique. What he said, shift it into your right hand, and then pass it. This is the way you pass it. This is the way you accept it. And so we did drill on that. It became second nature, and we never dropped the once leadoff person. But I never dropped the baton. Let me say that.
Yeah.
So I knew how to pass the baton. Now, if you're doing sprints, I used to run occasionally the mile relay. Now you've got to pay attention to technique and how you pass the baton. I actually, when I was running internationally, ran a 4x100. Now, I'm a half mile. I'm not a sprinter, but they needed one more person to fill out this relay. It was up in Toronto, I think. And I handed off to Ralph Plummer. Not Ralph, but anyway, that's. And I said, look, I'm taking the short international zone. We got a 20, so I'm going to run 80 yards. You're going to run a 110. He's going to run 110. So I'm going to take it at the very end. And somehow we screwed it up. We didn't have a chance to practice it. So
Right.
we bobbled it and we didn't win.
All right.
Yeah, so technique was important within practice. Our coach focused on the relay because he got more publicity than individuals. I didn't run a lot of individual races in my college year until later, and I think that hurt me with experience. Ran a lot of relays, and I always anchored it. But that was the name of the game. Our coach felt it's best that 4 people get a victory than 1 person.
Yeah, let's list off your college 2 mile relay achievements. Where did that go? And what was the time for people to put it in perspective?
Seton Hall University one time had held the world's record in the 2 mile relay. And that was always a goal of our coach, to reclaim that world record. At the time, the world record that they had held was like, I believe, 7:32 or something like that. The world record had been, I think, it may have been Georgetown University that had it at 7:28. It's indoor now.
Yeah.
And we had run a 7:31. I ran a 150 point anchor leg. So we broke the school record, but we did not break the world record. Later on in one of the meets, I believe it was in New York at the Old Garden, and we ran a 7:29, and team, I think it was Villanova, beat us in 7:28.7, and they got the world record. We got the second place.
Wow.
So we're indoors, we're running about 150 as an anchor leg. I was running 150 points, occasionally a 149, high 149. Sometimes enough to win, sometimes it wasn't.
And what about at the national meets?
The national championships were held in Madison Square Garden at the National U. We predominantly ran the 2-mile relay. So I am 3 times national champion indoors in the 2-mile relay, 1963 and 1964. And then also at the New York AC in 1968. Our coach decided, rather than put me in the individual 800 or 1,000 yards, he ran the relay. And so we became the national champions 2 years running.
What was the competitive attitude there as defending champs showing up? Was there trash talking? How was the camaraderie between teams at that high pressure national championship?
Even though we were very competitive on the track, we were very good friends off the track. No one walked around with their heads in the clouds saying they're superior. Neither Villanova, who had every right to, Georgetown at the same time, but everybody understood it's anybody's race to win or lose. Because somebody had earlier maybe had won, done superior, you went on that track and all bets were off. It's anybody's race to win or lose. We didn't really have a fear of our competitors. We just wanted to beat them. And I think that was pretty true of Eastern runners. In the East, the runners particularly wanted to win. So time wasn't not as important. In the West, a lot of the runners could care less that they finished in 8th place, but they broke the 4-minute mile.
Right.
It was a different attitude back then. This is, again, in the mid-60s. And at the end of the season, the East Coast runners would go out and clean up. So maybe they've only run the best half mile at 151, 150. They go out to the West Coast and run a 147. It was a difference in attitude. I think the East Coast at the time didn't care so much about time, but they wanted to win.
What were the rewards apart from results? Were there medals? Were there team trophies back then? Was that all part of the ceremony?
In the early time, 60s, when I was running through the mid-60s, the reward was a cheap medal or sometimes a 14-karat gold-filled medal, which are pretty nice. I always coveted the Milrose medals and the Penn relays and many others. Then later on, sort of the mid to late 60s, the meet directors started to give prizes. For example, a Polaroid camera. Trophies, of course, were nice, but they rushed. They were out. I kept all my medals in a gym bag for about 30 years. And then finally, my wife decided they should be displayed, and she put them in a trophy case. So the medals collected dust, but the gifts that were functional, nice to get. I remember getting a little instant Polaroid camera, and I used that until I wore it out. And there are other things like watches, and I drove watches to give some nice watches out, and then they wound up in the drawer because the batteries ran out. But that was nice. It was a nice change. And I got a silver tray, a few other things. Later in life, the medals are more memorable. The little chit-chits you get wear out and rust out.
Yeah. Before we get into your international running, with Seton Hall, as big man on campus in high school when you started winning, what was the status there in Seton Hall, and what was the recognition you got from the university?
Okay. Let me just finish with high school.
Okay.
So in high school, basically going into my senior year, I wasn't really much known at just going through, taking my classes. But when I did extraordinarily well in track and field, all of a sudden I become noticed by the cheerleaders also. So all of a sudden, now everybody knows us, and we're undefeated. We're winning these races. They even had a convocation to recognize us in front of the student body. So that was really a great time.
Yeah.
In college, entering an all-male school, basketball was the predominant sport. So it took a long time to get noticed. But when we started to win, all of a sudden the school paper and the local papers started writing up performances. So We became known among the male student body, but it wasn't like, so we ran another race, we won. We didn't let it go to our heads, if you will. I guess we could say we're humble. The university at the time didn't want to let any other sport overshadow basketball.
Wow.
And even though we were winning, it was the prevailing sports politics at the time. My coach always felt that the university let $1 million go down the drain by not publicizing two identical twins competing at national levels. It never bothered me because we got along well with the basketball players. And the basketball players, unfortunately, had to de-emphasize postseason play because of the scandal in the late 60s when they were caught cheating along with a bunch of other schools, shaving points in basketball. So the
Right.
basketball team couldn't really travel. And yet here we are winning meets after meets, traveling around the country, going out west to the NCAAs. There was some friction between the basketball team and the track team because we're gaining all the notoriety and they can't travel. And there was a bit of a jealousy, but I would say some of the better players never let that bother them, better basketball players.
I will just mention to other people, if they want to contact me, I'll put them in touch with a podcast that explains some of the novelization of what happened with the point shaving. It's an interesting story, and it's an interesting story in sports history that Seton Hall, maybe the New Jersey organized crime people were involved. It's an interesting story.
Yeah, and there were a number of colleges. Seton Hall just happened to fall on their sword and announced they were wrong and mea culpa, and it's what we're doing. I think
Yeah.
they overreacted, but that's
Yeah.
history.
One last thing before we go into your post-college career, let's talk about your personal experience with injuries, nutrition, anything else. What therapies and how did you deal with that stuff and what was available to you?
Good question, because at the time I was training, we're running anywhere from 20 to 15 miles a day. Now, we do know that we need to make up the calorie difference because you're expending them, but nutrition wasn't really much on our minds. We ate what they gave us. We did have a training table. So we would come in after the main student body had eaten, and there was supposed to have been an athletic training table, but it was basically what was left over from what was served before. So we started to complain, what is this all about? We're supposed to be getting special proteins or whatever else, but it's not. And we grumbled and complained, and finally they did away with it because it wasn't really helping. The emphasis on nutrition, eating properly, probably became more important in the 70s, probably starting in the 70s than it did in my generation. We would compete in a meet, Melrose games, for example, and we would have steak and potatoes and string beans 2 or 3 hours, 4 hours before competition. Now you're going to have pasta, you're going to be much more careful. So that type of nutrition we didn't think about.
Yeah.
In retrospect, we didn't do any cross training, no upper body training. We didn't do much long distance training during the track season. So I think a lot has been learned in the ensuing years. And of course, certainly now with sports medicine and much better training techniques and so forth. The West Coast, when I had a chance to get out on the NCAAs and meet with some of the trainers out there, it opened my eyes up to what was available and what was possible, because the West Coast was much further ahead. And I guess we were blind and naive. We were inexperienced. And this sounds like a good deal. Let's have a steak.
Yeah. What about injuries? Did you ever miss any competitions because of injury?
No, I was very lucky, Matt. I went through almost 10 years of competitive running and 50 years of skiing, never with a major injury. I had a knee strain once in my sophomore year, which maybe slowed me down for about 6 weeks or so. But no, I never had a major injury and never got spiked. So fortunately, in my career, injury was never a problem.
And academically, you succeeded. What was your vision for what running would be to you after university? When did you make that, like high school to college? What did you do for college to, I'm a runner and this is part of my life post-graduation?
I realized early on, once I got into college, that running and athletics in general is a very short period of your life, that you have to take advantage of it when you can. I also realized, being a middle distance runner, if I didn't get it done in my early 20s, it's not going to get done. So my goals was to try and make the Olympic team. I missed making it by a breadth of a hair in 1964. So I'd hoped to make it in 1968. I didn't. There was a thing called the Vietnamese War that got in the way. I got married and I had a child. So now what became important was livelihood for your family, your wife, and your children. Track and field at the time was strictly amateur. While there was some money going under the table, it wasn't enough to live on. And unless you found a proper sponsor, it was very difficult to compete post-collegiate school seriously and still make a living. Mm-hmm. Much of that has changed. So a number of things conspired against me to want to continue my running career beyond 1969 is basically when I stopped. So I had the desire. I didn't have the wherewithal and the means to do it.
Representing the USA in track, you have a famous race in the Soviet Union, which I'll make the video available to everybody who wants to follow up. It's a great video and a fast time and a great race. How did you get involved with the U.S. national team to compete overseas?
In the 1960s, the Amateur Athletic Union that controlled the selection of the Olympic team, of the national teams, and who was to compete overseas. And that was determined by your place in the national championship. In 1965, I competed in the national championships and finished second. Now, I was competing against Morgan Groth and Tommy Farrell, who was an Olympian in 64. And I knew the two people I had to beat was Groth and Farrell. I also knew that second place would get you on the team. So that particular event, I regret it now, but I was running to place, if you will. I was running to make the team.
Right.
So I think in retrospect, I could have won that, but I was running safe to make the team. So I made the United States national team as by virtue of the fact I finished second. And then we traveled to the Soviet Union. I became very well known by the fact that I won the 800 meters against the Soviet Union, the first time that any event was ever televised live from the Soviet Union. And Morgan Groth pulled up lame, so he was not able to compete. He finished for 1 point, but he didn't enter the competition. So I knew we've got 80 million people around the world watching. I got to win this race. No goddamn commie is going to beat me this day. We were there to fight communism. So we were told by the CIA, the United States State Department, that this is the most important event you're ever going to run in. And it was an extension of the Cold War. Yeah. And you sure as hell didn't want to lose. And that was my feeling. And here I am in the heart of the Soviet Union. The Russians take the pace out real fast. I'm thinking to myself, wow, this is fast. And my coach, John Gibson, said, they'll probably take it out fast. But he also said, George, I think you can run a 146. So that's in the back of my head as I'm going around the first turn. It's 51. It's very fast. And I'm saying, gee, I hope he slows down. And I said, I'm going to pass him. And he's still carrying this very fast pace. And then I said, no, I'm going to wait until I come off the turn. So all these thoughts are going into my head. The Russians are cheering loudly. And then I come off the turn. I feel really good. I blast into the lead and win it, as you've seen in the video. And the crowd, there was silence. We really remember this type of stuff when I was competing, But this particular race, I knew when I came off that turn and the finish line, I knew I was going to win. So nobody in the world, I felt, was going to beat me that day. And everything worked out well. I ran 146, my personal best, and became internationally known around the world.
Yeah. Let me set the scene for people that haven't seen this yet. It's broadcast in the U.S. Jim McKay announces the race. There's 4 people on the track. This is a dual meet, so there's 2 runners from each country. And they go out in 51 seconds, which is about what the top runners today are taking out the half mile in. Yep. And you had a plan. How often did you strategize, and did you know anything about the Russian runners?
I knew Bolashov, who was a well-known half miler. I didn't know anything about Rientelp, who was the other fellow, but I knew just from strategy that they were going to take the pace out fast. I didn't think it was going to be that fast. And I figured that their second guy, Rientelp, he would take the pace out. And their plan was to tire us out. We'd go with them. My strategy, I said, I know this is going to be fast. I don't care if I'm going out last. I said, I'm going to run my pace. And so I went out slower than they did, but I'm still right up there. You can only be so slow when you're only a few yards behind. I knew from training that I could sustain a 50 quarter mile. So I just strategized. The race is going the way I think it's going to go. The only thing I had to do is contain myself. Let's not go too quick. In other words, let's not go past the lead Russian too quickly. That would be their strategy. Then Bulashev would be, on my case, the last home stretch and beat me. So I figured I have to wait and wait. I feel good. And so there was a lot of strategy. The half mile is a race, or the 800 meters, where you only get one move usually. If you don't make it properly, you can get beaten easily, even though you may be the better runner. So that was very much on my mind. I was thinking the whole race.
Yeah, I think a lot of people listening to this podcast are runners. Not everybody's run the half mile, but it is a race where you don't get one mistake. One mistake and the race is not yours that day.
Yeah.
What do you remember about being in Russia?
The Russians can't be trusted. The Russians are sneaky little bastards. I'm not talking about the athletes. The athletes were really good. But for example, they knew we were coming for years, right? Because the meet is scheduled every other year. For 1 year it's in the United States, the following year it's in the Soviet Union. They know we're coming for at least 2 or 3, maybe more. We arrive in Moscow, and it's like they're surprised. They didn't know we're coming. The buses aren't there. They screw up with the passports, the luggages. It takes 2 hours for the buses to arrive. We get to Moscow, they forget where we're supposed to go. It takes another 2 hours to get to another airport. So every delay they could possibly put in our way was done. And it was clear what they were doing. They're trying to tire us out. So we're up without sleep for 36 hours.
Wow.
We get to Kiev. The event was in Kiev this year. We get to the hotel. It takes them an hour or two just to find our names and check us in, and then the elevators do not work. We have to carry our bags of 18 stories. The first meal we're served, if you've ever had tongue on a sloppy Joe sandwich, it's pretty good. But they served a whole tongue on this tray with the taste buds staring at you. Now, my mother had served tongue, so I was okay with it. I could eat it. But some of the wait men, they looked at that thing and they said, I'm not eating that. So, and these guys needed 3,000 or 4,000 calories a day. I don't think they ate well in the Soviet Union. That was our introduction. Once we got past the first day or two, things settled down and we focused on the meat and everything was run much better. But the Russians were a piece of work, because when they came to the United States, we rolled out the red carpet. They were put up at the Waldorf in New York City. We flew them across to Los Angeles like the year before. And red carpet, they're taking to Disneyland. And now we're showing off all of our good stuff because we have a lot of good stuff to show off. They don't have any good stuff.
Yeah.
So it was a lifetime experience as a young college graduate at 22.
Great. What was the end result of the meet? How important? U.S., Russia, who scored the most? And what was the coach's take on your performance?
The coach was Brutus Hamilton, who was the coach at the University of California. He was very pleased with my performance. And given the fact that when we first started out, Morgan Groth, who probably would have been the heir apparent, pulled up lame and was unable to compete, although he finished. This was the first time that the United States men's team had ever lost an international competition. Wow. We lost by 6 points, 118 to 112 or something like that. That year, the NCAA and the AAU were feuding like a bunch of old men. They were worse than the teamistas that were fighting over rats. So the NCAA had banned college athletes from competing in the national championship. It was really a disgrace. So we really didn't have all of our best runners. I was saying we were overconfident. That was not the case. I think conditions went against us. We didn't have our best sprinters. And one or two races would have made the difference. They disqualified our 4x100 relay for passing out of the zone.
Wow.
More. So a little bunch of mistakes. And Bruce Hamilton said, one team that wins all the time is not a meet. Every now and then you're going to lose one. Now, I was disappointed. I had done my job. I had won. But it took the luster off the fact that we lost the meet because the Americans aren't supposed to lose. That was the view. It was disappointing. The Russians, as I said, it's a different world. It was the height of the Cold War. And they did whatever they could to make it more difficult for us. And that's who they are. That's who they were, maybe. But as far as the athletes, we got along extraordinarily well.
As far as your teammates, were there people that you met on that team and that trip that you continued in touch with?
I would say yes. Jim Ryan was on it. He was Jim Ryan, the high school sensational.
Yeah.
Ralph Boston, for John Pinnell, Tommy Farrell. All the athletes got along extraordinarily well. Some of us kept in touch with each other, but with the internet and Facebook and email, we've all reconnected over the last 10 years.
Right.
So I'm in constant contact with Bill Toomey, world holder in the decathlon. We were roommates with my friend Tommy Sullivan, as I said, Tommy Farrell. We're all at like the late 70s, early 80s. And we remember what it took to get there. You can't bluff your way into an international competition. You've got to be able to train your way. So we've reconnected in a very memorable, nice way. Just the friendship exceeds the time barriers, even though we haven't seen each other in 50 years.
Yeah. Let me just do a little star casting. Bill Toomey, that name will be familiar to people who have been fans of track and field through the decades. What do you remember about Bill?
Oh, Bill and I we became good friends immediately. There was a warm-up meet before we went over to the Soviet Union. And I decided I'm going to run the 440. I didn't run on the mile of my event. And so Bill Toomey was in the event. And so after the event is over, I finished last place, but I run my personal best for the 440. And Bill Toomey was ahead of me. And I said, Bill, I know who you are, but I thought you were the only guy in this race I could beat. The 440 was his best event in the decathlon. I said, George, that's my best event. And I said it in a very nice way. And we became instantly the best of friends. And we roomed together when we were overseas in the World Cup games. And I went out and lived with him in California the following year for a couple of months. We trained. I helped him in the 1,500 meters. He helped me with the sprints. So it was just a nice camaraderie that lasts for a lifetime.
Yeah.
He was such a nice guy. He was really genuinely, very genuine, honest, and I can't say much about Bill Toomey.
That's great. Do you remember how he did at the Russian dual meet?
He didn't do well. He may have been one of those guys that suffered from eating a tug. It was off his game. I can't remember exactly why, but he didn't do as well as he had liked. But he came back and won the decathlon at the World University Games, the USSR Games. And he blew away the competition. He won by a couple of 100 points. So, yeah. And then, of course, he went on to win the Olympics and set the world record in 68.
Yeah.
Very competitive decathlon.
Yeah. This race that you had that we talked about in detail in the Russian dual meet was your PR, perfectly executed strategy. Are there any other races that are memorable for the opposite or similar where everything clicked or everything went wrong?
There are a couple that everything clicked. In some cases, maybe I didn't win them. The USSR Games, I was competing against Bill Carruthers and several Olympians from the year before, from Tokyo Olympics. And I thought I could have won that race. I ran as best as I could, but Bill Carruthers just beat me out by a tenth of a second. So I had no regrets. I would have liked to have got the gold medal. I got the silver instead. But the nice thing, or at least thing, I competed against all the Olympians that had competed the year before, except for Peter Snell. He had retired. The bad races you put out of your head, you say, what did I do wrong? What can I learn from this? And go forward. So I never dwelt on bad races except to say, I did this, I did that, I won't do it again. So I try to learn from it. But the big ones stand out. The good races stand out.
Yeah.
There are a lot of good races on relays, that sometimes you win, you're way ahead. Sometimes you come from behind, you win. But they're all good memories.
I enjoy watching your race in Russia. I'm going to make sure people know where they're. It's a great one to watch, and it's with this background story, it makes it even more enjoyable.
That's it for part one, but there's lots more to the George Germann story, and we'll get to that in episode 2.
I hope you enjoyed another episode of Running in the 70s. Voices, stories, and memories of athletes who were running in the 70s. Until next time, wherever you are, keep looking forward and don't forget to look back.